Hey guys, welcome to another day of Honors English 1. So I'm at a conference today and tomorrow, so I am filming this lesson for you all so that way we can still take notes and continue on. Remember what we talked about yesterday with our expectations for how to behave with the substitute, and that we definitely do not want our name to be left because that would be an automatic office referral. So today we're going to be talking about style, which style is basically just a special way that a writer uses language. So if you look up here on the screen, you'll notice these are the characters from the Breakfast Club, and they all obviously have different styles, the way that they wear their clothes, right? So we have the jock who's wearing like the Nike cut off, like he's about to go running. We have the basket case, as they call her, who's dressed in all black. She's supposed to be weird. We have the preppy girl. They all have different styles of clothing. When it comes to writing, style is pretty much the same thing. It's just the special way, like writers have different ways of using their words. Some people like a more formal diction. Some people don't like diction as much. Some people use a lot of figurative language in their work, whereas other people don't like that kind of flowery writing. So everyone has different styles. So we're going to be developing a vocabulary for how to discuss style. And hopefully you've noticed that Harper Lee has a very distinct style as well. So here are 5 components of style: diction, sentence structure, figures of speech, tone, and mood. Now I'm going to hit next, and I know you're probably writing down notes, but each of the next slides are going to be these 5 things. So it's okay if you didn't get all 5 written down just a second. So the first one is diction. Now if you think of where you've seen the word diction before, it probably sounds similar to dictionary. Well, a dictionary has words in it. That's what diction is. It's just word choice. The words that a writer chooses. Think about it. If you're writing a science paper, are you going to use for the science paper the term busted leg, or are you going to use fractured femur? You're probably going to use the more serious scientific term fractured femur rather than busted leg, because depending upon the piece, the diction might be different. So some authors like to use longer words, more formal words, right? Like pertinacious. That would indicate a more formal style of diction. Whereas other writers might like shorter words like stubborn, right? Like stubborn and pertinacious pretty much mean the same thing, but depending upon your style, you would use a word differently. Hopefully, with all these words that we're learning on vocab.com, you guys are starting to develop a very formal style of diction in your writing, and some of you possibly in your speaking. And contractions and slang, that makes it more conversational. So diction is either going to be described as formal, plain, or more conversational. So here's an example. For instance, during a portion of the first half of the present century, and more particularly during the latter part of it, there flourished and practiced in the city of New York a physician who enjoyed perhaps an exceptional share of the consideration which, in the United States, has always been bestowed upon distinguished members of the medical profession. Okay, so that said a lot, using very more formal words, right? Like portion, ladder, flourished, exceptional, bestowed, distinguished. This has a very formal style. Big fancy words. Compare that to this sentence. Americans respect doctors, and in New York 50 years ago, Dr. Sloper was respected even more than the most. Now, this sentence is pretty much saying the same exact thing as the first one, but it does so with a very different style of diction. We would describe this as more plain, regular words, okay? Not necessarily conversational because it doesn't have contractions and slang. This would just be a very plain style. So that's the first element of style, is diction. The second element is sentence structure. This is just the way sentences are put together to form, the way words are put together to form sentences. Do you have like short, simple sentences? Do you have more long, complex sentences, maybe with a semicolon, several clauses thrown together with punctuation, like commas and semicolons? It varies. Sometimes authors might even use fragments. So their sentence structure is going to be a part of their style. For instance, that example we saw earlier. Notice this whole thing is one sentence. We have a comma here, we have a comma here, another comma here, but it's all one sentence, right? So this would be very long and complex sentence structure because it's only one sentence. Compare that to these. He had to fly it somehow, had to fly the plane. He had to help himself, right? These sentences are more simple, direct. This one's even a fragment, okay? So with sentence structure, you're just looking at the length of the sentences. Is it more long and complex or short and simple? Now, the next type, sorry, the phone's ringing in the background. My student A is going to answer that. The next type that we're going to be talking about is figures of speech. Now, when we're dealing with figures of speech, we're talking about plain versus ornate, which is just a fancy way of saying, do they use figurative language in their piece or not? So first off, what is a figure of speech? These are expressions that are based on unusual comparisons and are not literally true. The most common types that you all have heard, simile, comparing two things using like or as. For instance, she was as happy as a clam. She was happy like a clam. That would be a simile because it uses like or as. A metaphor is a comparison between two unlike things without using like or as. So instead of saying she was as happy as a clam, you would just say she is a clam. So you just directly put it out there. Whereas personification, that's where you give human-like characteristics to non-humans. So that's a little bit different than simile or metaphor. For instance, opportunity was knocking at the door, or my alarm clock sprang to life at 6:30 a.m. Well, unless someone named opportunity came knocking at the door, or unless your alarm clock literally grew a heart and feelings and was able to spring to life and be alive at 6:30, then they're using personification. And it's still a comparison between two unlike things. You're just comparing something to a human. So these are your three most common types of figures of speech: simile, metaphor, personification, which I know you guys have been learning since elementary school. So here's how we describe it with style. If someone uses a lot of figurative language in their writing, then we say they have an ornate style with regards to figures of speech. If they really don't use those, then that would be more plain style. Authors have different ways that they like to write. I prefer writing with figurative language, whereas some of you might prefer just more plain direct writing. It's just different styles. All right, the next two are somewhat similar, but they have a key difference. So tone is an attitude. Tone is the attitude that a writer takes toward the subject of a work, its characters, or the audience. Notice the key word here is writer. So tone is just how the writer feels about whatever they're writing about. They might be pessimistic, which means they don't look forward hopefully to it. They might be more humorous, more joyful. Could be tragic, like Romeo and Juliet. Could be sarcastic, anything like that. Tone is just how the writer feels. Now, the opposite of that is mood. So whereas tone is an attitude that the writer has, mood is an atmosphere that is created by the writer. And this deals with the reader. So how does the writer use language to make the reader feel something while reading? So whereas tone is more about the author, mood, it's still created by the author, but the intent is for an atmosphere created for the reader. For instance, if you think of Stephen King, hopefully you all recognize some of these movies, like It, Carrie, that's Stephen King himself in the middle, from The Shining, from the movie Misery, right? Like all these movies, Stephen King has a very distinct style with his mood, creates a very spooky atmosphere. And look, they're even sitting there doing a Ouija board. So mood can be specific to an author as well with their style. So remember, tone versus mood. Tone is how the author feels about the subject, so it's their attitude towards it, whereas mood is all about how the reader feels while reading it, so the atmosphere created. All right? So these are our 5 elements of style. Diction is your word choice. Sentence structure deals with the length of sentences. Figurative language, do they include a lot of figures of speech or not? Tone, how does the author feel about what they're writing? And mood, how do they try to get the reader to feel while reading it? So what you guys are about to do is get, the substitute is going to pass out a paper for you that's a style practice. So you're going to go through and you're going to label those sentences based on the style. It's multiple choice. And then once you finish that, I have posted the key on the daily agenda log. So only once you have finished it, really, try it on your own first because you need to make sure you're doing it correctly. Once you have finished it, you're going to get on the daily agenda log, open up the key where I've explained it and given you the answers. And hopefully this stuff is starting to make sense. I look forward to seeing you guys in a couple days.